In our last episode, we reported that the Digital Economies Act would be coming into force this July. In late June, it was announced that the government have postponed this indefinitely due to regulatory problems. Hello, and welcome to Tech Point Zero, your popular technology show with Chris and Ben. You're listening to episode 4, released July 2019. My name is Ben, and as ever, I'm joined by Chris. In this episode, we'll be talking with Chad about changing their name and how systems often aren't designed for it, and discussing the release of the new Raspberry Pi 4. Let's get to it. So at the end of last month, the Raspberry Pi Foundation announced that they had released the Raspberry Pi 4, and we thought we'd like to have a little bit of a chat about it.
I'm really excited to get my hands on one of these. Not sure if I'm going to.
One of the first tweets I saw about this was from you, Chris, and I think the tweet went something along the lines of, me, I don't know where my last Raspberry Pi went. Also me, I really want the new Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, it was. I don't have any use for my existing Raspberry Pi. It's not doing anything, or at least one of them isn't doing anything in the drawer.
So I think perhaps the first thing to start with is, what are the core differences between the 4 and the previous generation, the Raspberry Pi 3? And I suppose the big thing that people are going to immediately see is the fact that it's now got support for dual screens, thanks to a GPU upgrade.
Well, there's a GPU upgrade, and then there's the micro HDMI ports, which is, I don't know, it feels a bit risky in terms of like it's another adapter people need to use it. I might have one in my drawer, I don't know. But it does give you this dual monitor support. 4K for one monitor, but I think you can only do that at 30 FPS. So it's a bit restrictive at that stage. Like two 4K monitors is pretty extravagant anyway.
Off a $35 computer.
Yeah, exactly. But 2K monitors would be glorious. Like, I don't even have that on my desktop PC. Hopefully the GPU upgrade as well is going to add some additional power. Apparently there's GPU-backed rendering in Chrome and Firefox. So you'll be able to get all the OpenGL rendering for the videos. The desktop experience is said, I haven't seen this yet, but it's supposed to be sort of equivalent to sort of low-entry laptop or Chromebook kind of level. So it should actually be usable as a desktop.
It's definitely encroaching on those low-end x86 laptops. And also, a lot of the marketing around this is targeted at desktop use, which I thought was very interesting.
I don't know how many people are actually going to replace it with a desktop. Maybe that person who, I don't know, they've got a family member or themselves or whatever, they're happy kind of setting it up and doing some fiddling. But they don't really do much on a desktop. But most of what they use is like the stuff you can do on your phone and your tablet. And they just want that desktop just for the odd thing that's easier on the desktop. You know, where they occasionally want to sit down with a keyboard and mouse.
I almost perhaps see it being like a Chromebook for hobbyists.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
This is also the first model that we've been able to choose how much RAM we put in it. And we've got some different slots. We've got 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, and 4 gigabytes. Each step gives you a jump of £10 or $10 in price, which is pretty reasonable. I mean, I think when I first looked at it, I was like, oh, that's a bit steep for a RAM increase, but you're still getting a computer for less than £60.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit steep. I sort of had the same reaction. And I realized that the last RAM increase again doubles the RAM. So you're getting the same as you already got, but for an extra tenner, like the sort of price per gig seems to be best at the higher end, the 4 gig kind of range. That seems to be the best efficiency there. 4 gigs, you can do an awful lot with. Like, there's other spec changes as well we'll talk about later on, but it seems like it would now make a really decent NAS sort of server host, at least for home NAS. Like, it's not going to necessarily run a big office NAS or anything, but if you just want to put some movies on there or some family files, then I think that's quite a reasonable kind of level of performance, especially with the processor it's got now. When
I'm looking at these specs, I'm kind of also thinking about my VPS that I have, and these specs are very much rivaling those of my VPS. I mean, fine, it's a big Xeon server, but in terms of amounts of RAM and CPU cores, it's kind of on par. And I run about 9 different applications on that VPS server. So, you know, the thoughts of that I could perhaps bring all that in-house for £54 that's very interesting.
I've had sort of similar ideas myself. I've jumped backwards and forwards between self-hosting stuff at home and sort of installing on a VPS. I think then for me, there's a convenience aspect to the VPS that probably keeps me there more than on the Raspberry Pi. But it's definitely capable of hosting multiple web applications. at the same time. You might actually, this I've just realized looking at the RAM, if you have the 4 gig model, you might be able to run GitLab on this, which is normally like 2 to 4 gig kind of minimum level. You probably not be able to run it again for a big team. It's not going to do office level kind of, multiple people pushing to it all at the same time. And it might not run your CI. But as a nice sort of Git interface, that's good. That's nice and easy.
So I read a tweet earlier that said that the Raspberry Pi Foundation website, I think, was actually hosted on a cluster of Raspberry Pi 4s.
Yeah, as I saw that, they switched over at the same time.
That's definitely dog-fooding your own product.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. I don't know, because I know the earlier Raspberry Pis, I don't know when they fixed this or if they have fixed it yet. I know the early Raspberry Pis had problems with the SD cards not being very reliable or the data getting corrupted. Don't know if they fixed that or they just plug in hard drives.
I've got a feeling that this doesn't, I think this might do net booting.
Yes, it does now because of the gigabit Ethernet.
Yeah, so a lack of SD card means they don't have local storage. Everything's network based, which is fine for a sort of server environment.
Yeah, if you set up like that. I'm gonna skip to the Ethernet in that case then, because it was something that was always kind of limiting for the Raspberry Pi for me, in that the Ethernet used to run off the USB hub. And it now runs off a separate controller. So it's got a dedicated controller and it can do true gigabit Ethernet. It's absolutely brilliant. There's so many more applications that opens up. That's part of the reason it would hopefully work well as a NAS host. My dream is to be able to use it as a little router at some point. I put like a cut down PF sensors or WRT on it.
Having those USB 3 ports, and there is only 2 of them, that allows you to probably hang off an additional 2 network interfaces if you want to, giving you more potential for having an in and an out for a router.
I think it's definitely borderline because you could have one of the interfaces on, probably the faster interface on the Ethernet side, and then the USB 3 interface for using the other side of the router. And yeah, you could get a router out of that. And I'm sure the OpenWRT people, if it's practical or usable, are going to find a way of getting that set up. I did also find USB Ethernet adapters can be quite unreliable, especially at the cheaper end. So yeah, you might be able to build a mini router here. I'm not sure if it's yet going to be doing sort of deep packet inspection or quality of service at the level of performance that none of it would be offloaded onto hardware. It would all just be on the CPU. But it's definitely exciting that you can start to have a very cheap router that you build yourself.
And that being said, you've got 2 USB 3 ports on this thing. It's true USB 3. So that's 2 external hard drives attached. USB 3, I understand, is faster than a SPDI drive will get you data. So that, again, really gives you potential for building a NAS out of this thing.
Yeah, you can have a NAS with 2 drives attached. I'm not sure how well mirroring would work between them. That's the one situation where I'm kind of like, oh, that might be a bit of a kicker from a backup perspective, because when I believe the USB 3 ports are still connected to the same controller, so bandwidth would be shared between them. So if you're writing to both disks at the same time, your bandwidth would be cut in half, and I don't know if there's enough overhead there to make that work. There might well be. What else? We've got the 1.5 gigahertz processor, which I believe is now a 28 nanometer process.
Yep. So the reduction from a 40 nanometer silicon gives us the power efficiency that we need to cram more transistors into the same die, and gives us a better efficiency all round and a bit better performance as well. I think up to about 3 times, the blog said.
3 times is like the top end for idealized applications. I think most of the benchmarks coming out about twice as fast. That being said, I was surprised to find out that people have managed to overclock this already to 1.7 and a half-ish, so 1.75 gigahertz. And that's a pretty substantial increase. With Raspberry Pi 1, 2, and 3, every time they upgraded it just took out more of that thermal room they had. The CPU got hotter and hotter and hotter every single time. And it appears they've made this performance increase without actually increasing the amount of heat generated by the CPU.
And I bet that is in part due to the reduction in the transistor size.
Yeah, I would imagine that's the process change.
So also in the Raspberry Pi 4, we get Bluetooth 5. I'm not entirely sure on the benefits of Bluetooth 5 over the previous generation.
The only benefit I'm aware of is I think you get a native multi-pairing mode. So you can pair a single host device to multiple speakers, and it's just built into the protocol. So anything that implements Bluetooth 5 will have to implement that. I don't know how reliable the syncing of it is, but if maybe you're both, two people are watching the same film at the same time, you can both listen at the same time because you can connect 2 sets of Bluetooth headphones. That's the kind of main application for it.
So to power all of this new fancy kit, we've got a change from the old micro USB up to a new USB-C charging port, which gives us 500 milliamps of extra power, which will also allow us to give a full 1.2 volts on the USB ports, which I don't think was possible before at full load.
No, I don't think they could power the USB devices and have the CPU at max power on the previous ones. It would tend to create like hard resets on the device rather than anything graceful. I think this makes it kind of difficult to do that now. I don't know if it's impossible. I don't know if you can still overload it. But yeah, it definitely gives you more headroom to play with from a power usage point of view.
The Raspberry Pi Foundation found that there was a difficulty getting reasonable priced USB-C chargers. So they have teamed up with an external company to make sure that they are able to offer USB-C power adapters straight from the wall to USB-C for all the most common power adapters. So European, UK, US, and Australian. So they will be able to be bought along with your new Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, the USB-C is an interesting one. I'm kind of surprised we didn't see 3 USB-C ports. So 2 for the display and 1 for power.
To go with that, I was perhaps surprised that maybe we saw USB 3 and didn't go straight to, a couple of USB-C ports.
Oh, like just go full out USB-C on all over the place sort of thing.
Absolutely, yes, because you could have then had Dongle City, you could have had all the dongles.
It does seem to fit that kind of sort of home hacker kind of situation. Like while it's not ideal in a MacBook scenario where you don't want to be carrying lots and lots of dongles around with you, with the Raspberry Pi, you can kind of put it in a case, you can put it in a box, the dongles can be fairly small, and that makes it a lot more flexible in what you can connect to it.
I imagine then that we might see more USB-C ports on the next generation Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's a trend that continues. We start doing it for display, we start doing it for the input output. Yeah, that'll be awesome. Okay, so the other thing is they haven't really increased the price for this generation. If you want to step up to the 4 gig tier and buy a more expensive Raspberry Pi, it definitely is more expensive than it has been. I think £55.
£54, $55.
But if you actually look at the sort of 2 price points, so the 1 gig and the 2 gig, that's still £35 and £45. And I actually looked up the release price for the Raspberry Pi, adjusted for inflation, was £40, which is sort of bang in the middle of those two.
So in real terms, it's come down in price.
In real terms, the cheaper end, the 1 gig end, has definitely come down in price. And you get more for it as well because you still get 4 cores, 1.5 gigs and a gig RAM. But yeah, the average point between them is exactly the release price. So you can kind of pay a little bit more and get double the RAM, or pay a little bit less and save you money. The 4 gig version, I think we might find, I don't know, I wonder if it's a little bit overspec'd. Like, it's there for very specific applications that need it. Like we're talking about the NAS sort of application. But I think I think there's plenty of applications that I'd have in mind, say running a web server, that do not need 4 gigs of RAM. And it might be a little bit silly buying that at times.
I think that it's perhaps one of those things that we probably all have enough Raspberry Pis sitting around that are first and second generation Raspberry Pis that it might even be worth, if you have the spare £10, buying the 4 gig because it might eke it out to real-term use for an extra couple of years. Going for the 1 gig, I think that you're still looking at very specific applications for that, and you may find it difficult to repurpose that in the future.
I just think because they've talked about the production they did. I think they mainly made 2 gigabyte models.
Yes.
And I've been surprised to find that people go for the 4 gigabyte. And I think, people with a fair amount of disposable income are going to just spend it on the most they can get, because then it doesn't matter if it goes wrong, and if they've wasted some money, they've only wasted a tenner. But I think I understand the logic of the 2 gigabyte version will be the most popular. If you look at how the system's balanced, if you were building a PC, if you were designing the spec, you would try and keep all the parts balanced. You don't want to put too much RAM in a slow system. You want to spend your money evenly. And I think that 2 gig model is in that spot. Like it's where that is. So I totally understand why they thought that was going to be the more popular one. Turns out everybody has gone out and bought the 4 gig version, and you now can't buy it anywhere. It's out of stock pretty much everywhere, I think.
So I believe that, so when I was having a poke around earlier, in a number of places, the 1 gigabyte model is also out of stock. So maybe it is just a fact that obviously we don't have figures at the moment, but we could find that day one purchasing was fairly even across the 3 models. It's just that the fact that they did produce more 2 gigabyte models meant that we still have some around here at about 8:45 in the evening to actually purchase.
So something else I wanted to talk about is really who the Raspberry Pi is designed for. And it's interesting every time they've done an upgrade, in this one specifically, the things they upgrade are generally adding features that I see industrial and hobbyist consumers wanting. So the dual screen support, certainly the better Ethernet, more RAM or RAM options. In the release announcement, they really stressed that it still supported power over Ethernet, so you can still put a hat on it and power it remotely. And this all sort of it doesn't seem like stuff that would be that important in the education market. My understanding is that the education market would benefit from cheaper total cost of ownership, so reducing the price of the monitor, the keyboard, everything else that goes along with it. Easier setup, better instructions for teachers, better materials, and the Raspberry Pi Foundation does produce some of that. But I think they've definitely had to pivot their focus over the years towards the people that are buying the devices.
I think it's a real shame because I think there are probably two things at play, at least. One is because industry and hobbyists will be more savvy to their needs, I imagine that they are the most vocal. And so they're the users that the Raspberry Pi Foundation hear from. Secondly, as you just said, the industry must buy hundreds upon thousands of these things. And schools will buy a lot, but they don't have the budgets to buy half as many, I imagine, as industry would.
I wonder if the USB-C functionality we were talking about would be better for schools in terms of enabling easier and more modular sort of plugging in of devices. Like the GPIO pins are really interesting, really fun for a certain type of person, a certain type of interest, but some people will just want to plug the device in and then be like, oh, look, I can control this camera, or I can get this temperature sensor. And that's not really there with the existing USB devices.
I wonder if that is also a case of, so we've seen a lot of, famously, the MacBook, whatever it was, came out a year or two ago, and it's only got a single or two USB-C ports, and that's it. But I have still yet to really see, I think I've seen one in the wild USB-C pen drive. I haven't seen an awful lot of USB-C first peripherals. I've seen lots of things that will plug into your adapter, but although the market is moving in that direction, it's not 100% USB-C yet. And so I think that while next year or the year after, definitely 100%, I wonder if maybe it was the foundation being maybe a little bit short-sighted. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I suppose a bit more current-sighted when it comes to education, that actually USB-C is not going to help them yet.
Yeah, sure. The interesting comment I just want to add to the USB-C thing. The main driver of it is, like it has been for USB devices for a very long time now, is mobile phones. Mobile phone manufacturers want to make their devices thinner. So every time there's a new USB standard, it tends to allow for thinner phones. They release them, and the phone release is what drives the accessory release, not the other way around. And that's why we end up standardizing on such a sort of relatively quickly. Like if you kind of go back 10, 20 years to computer sort of ports, the selection of ports was much larger, and you'd have a different port for every job on the computer. And now it's pretty much almost USB, and hopefully soon will be entirely USB-C. So personal projects, have you got anything you want to be running on a Raspberry Pi 4, Ben?
So the only thing, and I'm a little ashamed to say this because a lot of people will meet me and ask, so what am I doing with the Raspberry Pi? Unfortunately, very little. I used to run my DHCP server on a Raspberry Pi, but the thing that I actually really love the Raspberry Pi for is RetroPie, which is a bit of software that you can put on your Raspberry Pi, and it has a collection of emulators on there for old games consoles. So I can replay my old SNES games and even some PlayStation 1 and a couple of N64 games. But the Raspberry Pi 3 really is limited when it comes to playing that sort of generation of game. So I'm really kind of hoping that if I get a Raspberry Pi 4 and perhaps even a 4GB model, which will give it just an extra bit of RAM to cache things in, that could actually push the performance up to play maybe N64, PlayStation 1, possibly even maybe some PlayStation 2 generation games.
It's going to make a great emulator to machine sort of soundy TV in a nice little case.
And just to revisit the NAS potential as well, although it's perhaps a little too small for me, I've got a Ray Z Volume sitting behind me on the floor waiting for a computer to power it. The Raspberry Pi 3 was just about powerful enough to run ZFS. So the Raspberry Pi 4 will have all the power you need to run a small ZFS system. And that's quite attractive as well.
I think it'll also be good for Node-RED that we talked about in an earlier episode. Like being able to build more complex flows, maybe more memory intensive. If you're doing anything a little bit more serious, I think that could be really useful there. Or just simply being able to run multiple applications at the same time.
I suppose as well, could you extend that, given that it's got extra power as well, if you needed to power anything directly off of it?
Yeah, definitely. The other thing I'm interested in, I used to use Raspberry Pi 3 for running coding. And I recently went back to it just to sort of see kind of what happened, reinstalled it on a Raspberry Pi 3. And I don't know if my expectations have changed or if like Cody's had more functionality added or what happened, but it definitely felt laggier than I remember. It wasn't as fluid and responsive as it used to be. It had its moments, but it wasn't what I remembered. And I'm just hoping that the change in the GPU and the changes in the CPU, like the doubling the performance, I think that should be enough to bring it back to a level that is really quite usable. We've got the Amazon Fire Sticks watching Amazon Prime, and they're worse than Kodi. They're slower and laggier than Kodi is today on a Raspberry Pi 3. And I kind of think this is going to show them up, like similarly priced device, and hopefully as smooth, if not hopefully smoother than the existing Kodi, which is already smoother than the Fire Stick.
Not only that, but with the 4K display now, you can power a bigger and better TV than you could before.
I wonder how much effect this has on that. Like, I don't kind of think of them as competitive. They're not really alternative. They're not really substitute goods in that way. But it definitely demonstrates what's possible with a relatively cheap device. And I can sort of see Google and Amazon looking at that and trying to reduce the price of their existing, because they've got existing 4K solutions that are just a bit more expensive, like sort of 60, 70, 80 sort of pounds.
I think the big draw that they still have versus a Raspberry Pi is that the Kindle Fire Stick just literally sticks into your HDMI port on your TV. This still requires a clutter of cables to properly function. And I think that perhaps for some people that's maybe less attractive.
With the Wi-Fi, does it really?
Only in the sense that you're not probably going to get a really small HDMI cable and hang it behind the TV. It's going to have to be mounted. There's going to be a length of cable there.
Yeah, it's not quite as quick and clean and easy.
Perhaps then you add a nice case that adds an extra bit of cost as well, and maybe it's not quite as competitive.
I think I don't think it's a substitute good. I don't think it's competitive or in the same market at all. I think what it does do though is demonstrate what can be done. It's sort of the building block for the engineers that are building those devices. And when you sort of, here is the spec, this is how well it runs Kodi. And Kodi, like it's skinnable, so it tends to, there's an added cost to doing that in terms of processing the UI and everything. So I don't imagine it's as fast as you could build it. And I would be shocked if this struggles with Kodi at all. And at £45, that's a lot cheaper than some of the alternatives from Google and Amazon.
Another personal project that I'm kind of, as we speak, kind of brainstorming is if I get one to replace the Raspberry Pi 3 in my RetroPie, I might actually give it a run as a small desktop box, because actually, if it serves my day-to-day, having a Raspberry Pi desktop that basically consumes no power at all to do my web surfing and things like that, and only switching a desktop on when I need some grunt, that's actually kind of appealing.
Yeah. It's sort of instant boot as well, because you can probably afford to just leave it on. Today we've got Chad with us to discuss changing your name and real name policies.
My name's Chad. I used to be a developer, but then I got better, and so now I'm a user researcher for a public body which will remain nameless. Yeah, I usually do talks on things about gender, and I thought, well, I don't want to keep talking about gender. I'm bored now. I should have just got the hang of it. But I thought I wanted to talk about names because it's kind of related, and it's kind of an experience I've had recently. So a couple of years ago, I changed my name by deed poll for kind of social reasons. I changed my first name, and I thought while I'm there, I'll add a middle name, which was a massive mistake. Even though I now have the coolest name, it's confused everybody in the world. And actually that experience of kind of being 3 years later, 2 years later, still having my old name pop up occasionally when I do stuff is just still just so bizarre. And then I've been thinking about it a lot because I hang out on Reddit a lot for my sins, and there's a lot of kids, especially in kind of the transgender community, who don't understand the name changing process and have kind of myths and stuff about it. And I always feel like I'm having to jump in and tell them to this isn't the right way to do it, or you don't need this, or you do need that. And what's kind of weird about it is that in the UK we don't have legal names. We attach a lot of social importance to names, but there's no such thing as a legal name. Your name is literally the things that people call you. So there's nothing inherently illegal about having multiple names. It's only really illegal if you use it to get stuff.
Okay.
So if you kind of, you sign up for services multiple times with different names to get, new customer discounts, that kind of stuff, right? But that's just fraud. It's not really related to names. And then the thing I found quite weird about it was because we don't have legal names, and technically the only thing I have to do to change my name is to go to the bank and go, oh, by the way, I'm this person now. But banks don't do that because Nobody does that because everyone really likes documentation. So you get a thing called a deed poll, which companies will trick you into paying for, and I was tricked into paying for. But you can do a deed poll for free. It's just, you literally just write a thing down that goes, I'm not going to use this old name anymore. This is my name now. Thanks. Yep. You might get someone to sign it if you're feeling fancy. You might pay a tenner for a solicitor to sign it.
So I changed my surname a couple of years ago to incorporate my wife's, and we went through the government, which did cost something, and you get a fancy sort of, I say fancy, a scrap of paper really, that you've stamped. There was a lot of misinformation that I felt online because, like you, I saw companies saying, pay us just £300 and we'll do your deed poll for you, all the way down to, you just write it on a napkin that you pronounce your old name. It was quite difficult really to find what the correct path was.
Yeah, because so you can get a thing called an enrolled deed poll where basically, I can't remember what it is, but I think you go through government and it basically becomes a matter of public record, so someone can look you up essentially and go, when did this person change their name? And it goes in the London Gazette, very posh.
That's the one.
So people can kind of look you up and go, and there'll be a little public record that says so-and-so from What's It Place is now known by so-and-so at What's It Place, because the address matters for some reason. You only have to do that if you want to be looked up in the public record. I think kind of people of high prominence will do it because it's to do with transference of titles or whatever, but I'm assuming you're not a lord or a viscount or something, I don't know.
I've just realised that's exactly what I did.
So
I'm not a lord or a viscount.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realise that you don't have to do that. I paid for like a £30 deed poll, which I didn't have to, but it has a shiny stamp on it, so places will accept it. I don't know, like it's got an embossed thing on it. So the thing that I found weird was, first of all, the mistake that everybody makes is to do the passport first, because you think, passports are super important because you use them to prove your identity for everything. So I do my passport first, and I was invited to speak at a conference, and so I only had a short amount of time to change my passport, so I had to do the go to Liverpool for the day when it was rail replacement, which was so not fun. So the problem occurred when actually you need to do your passport last, because what you need for your passport is proof that you're living in that name. So you don't just need the deed poll, you need like bank statements or tenancy agreements, all that kind of fun stuff, which I didn't have because I decided to change my passport first. So I'd already changed it with HMRC and Works and my bank, so I'd get paid. And then the difficulty came because I did the middle name. So I didn't have anything to hand when I'm like in this appointment, which cost me a stupid amount of money and travel. And I said, well, I've not been paid yet. I've not had all this yet. I said, well, I've got my app. So I showed her like my bank app. She was like, yeah, it's good for the first name because it's got my first name on it, but my middle initials are on it. And she's like, well, that doesn't count because we need to see the full name. At which point you're like, who gives an actual about my middle name, right? It's just like, I have it for kind of vanity, but it's not important. So I visited my bank. I went to 3-4 different branches of my bank to get them to print me off something that had my full name on it. And they can't do it because even though it's online banking, your name has to fit in the little window in the envelope because they can't word wrap. And you get the little plastic window. They can't word wrap that. It has to be one line, even on online statements that they print off for you at the branch. It's more about technology because like bank systems are ancient bits of care. I mean, we broke NatWest's mortgage system by having a flat. Essentially, because we were saying, what's your current address? I'm like, it's flat 12. And like, you can't have that because the address has to start with a number. So for the mortgage, we were at 12 Flat Road. But I just found that intensely frustrating. So in the end, especially because they kept telling me that my deed poll for the passport would be fine, and I had to be like, no, it's not. I've just spent £100 going to visit them. Eventually, I had to get a bank manager to write me a letter to say this person has an account at our bank and is known by this full name.
Right. Okay.
And that's how I got my passport. So don't do your passport first. It's like pro tip. And don't add a middle name because apparently if I just changed my first name, I would have just got my passport from my bank app and that would have been fine. My driving license, for example, my full name doesn't fit. I don't have both my middle names on my driving license. I have first name, first middle name, and then the first initial of my second middle name, so it doesn't fit on the line.
That must be a problem for a lot of people. There's plenty of situations where you have a name that long.
We're not really adapted for multiple middle names, so different services have different middle names for me.
Yeah.
Not that many services use my actual full name. I'm not referred to by my full name in very many places. I'm kind of lucky in that my middle names are quite short in terms of the words. So, people who have Chad's a very short first name. And this is the thing, right? We still kind of have this problem where we've designed databases, for example, to fit a certain number of characters. Because like, oh, you know, a name's only giving me this number of characters. And then you've gone, actually, but, you know, different cultures have different lengths of names, for example. And, you know, different people have different. So kind of some cultures, you have 2 surnames, but we only accept 1 surname. So their surname becomes their middle name, which means it gets lost a lot or it gets forgotten or, you know, and they're like, well, that's not my name. I mean, my full name is this, this, this. And I just find all that fascinating that it's super basic. A name is like the most basic piece of information about you, and yet we are constantly getting it wrong. Not just in tech, in lots of places. And like name changes are super common. I mean, lots of people change their names for various reasons, and yet lots of systems just can't cope with this really basic fact that I might change my name sometimes, or, you know, the number of places that still want me to fax something, or, you know, or post something. A lot of them will take post as well, but that involves you posting a legal document, which you may not want to do because it's your legal document. So I paid for copies of my DPOL so I could send them off, but some places don't accept the copy. So you just kind of, you can't just do it. You know, I was really hoping that you could just like say, you can't just tell the government, oh, this is my new name, because I have to do it with HMRC separately, I have to do my driving license separately, I have to do my passport separately. So I worked for a digital department of a kind of non-tech company, but sort of tech, I don't know. And when I changed my name with them, I had to change it on every single separate system myself. So I emailed HR and they changed it on the HR stuff. Email IT, they changed my email address, which meant I lost all my old emails. They changed my Slack username, which meant I lost access to all of my old Slack messages. I had to rejoin all the private channels, which I couldn't remember which ones they were because I hadn't thought. I thought, oh, they could just change my name on Slack. But apparently either you can't change your name on Slack or our IT admins didn't know how to change my name on Slack. So I lost all of my Slack history. So even months after I changed my name, I was still finding things like, oh, now I have to go and change it in the expenses system. I have to change it in the travel booking system. It's changed this thing, but not this thing, or, you know, which is ridiculous. Again, with the DPOL, HR wouldn't accept my DPOL unless my manager had signed it, and we had to go, no, it's a legal document, like someone else has countersigned it, like a friend's countersigned it, because it's not a work document, it's like my document, you can get lost. And they're like, no, your manager has to sign it. And we went back, me and my line manager went back and forth several times and said, that's not how this works. So eventually I had to scan it, and then he had to digitally sign the scan, and then we sent that off so they'd accept it. It was just, it's so frustrating. What I found actually is way easier to just change providers of things. So for my mobile phone, rather than faxing my DPOL off to whoever, I decided to just close my account and went with a different mobile provider instead. Because when you start a new account, they don't ask, they just go, well, what's your ID? And I'd have my driving license by then. Like, here's my driving license. Oh, that's great.
So it's more difficult to change than just to start a new account in most cases.
Yeah. So things like PayPal, it's easier to just close your PayPal account and open a new one. Or just don't change your name in your PayPal account and wait for the inevitable when they catch me and close my PayPal account. Is my current status. So I can change my name on my card and stuff. So my card's attached to it and I change the name on that. And so, you know, it still gets billed with the right name and everything. But at some point, as PayPal do, they're kind of prone to changing, you know, deleting 20-year-old accounts for some kind of minor violation. So at some point, I will lose my PayPal account. But
and taking all the money with it.
Probably. Well, there's not that much. There's no money in my PayPal account. I just use it to buy crap online. But you know, because they wanted my DPOL or they wanted my passport, and I'm like, well, no, I don't trust PayPal. Like, I barely trust them to pay things through my card. Right? That's why I don't have any actual money in my PayPal account, because you can't trust them to do anything. Same with games companies. So, you know, so things like when I lost my authenticator for World of Warcraft.
Oh, that's painful. My
phone died, like absolutely died. I lost the authenticator, and you know, it says write down these codes in case you lose your authenticator and keep them in a safe place, and nobody does that, so I didn't do that. And again, they wanted like, oh, to reopen your account, we want your passport or we want your ID, and I'm like, it's just a game, dude. I don't want to be like emailing scans of my passport, you know, like, because emailing is not very secure.
My wife still plays under her maiden name, and every single time I open up, is it Friends? They got rid of Real ID in the end, but every time I open up the Friends, her maiden name's there. And it's just not worth the aggro, like sending off the marriage certificate and everything just to change the name.
I get what they mean, because, it's not that, on one hand, it's just a game, but on the other hand, it's like a massive thing for crime and money laundering and God knows what. But on the other hand, it's just, I don't want to send you I'd already cancelled my subscription by that point. I think I wanted to pick it up because a new expansion came out. I think Legion came out. And I was like, so I had to start again with a new account. It is impossible to start World of Warcraft with a brand new account. It's absolutely impossible because the entire economy is based around having a main character that bankrolls you. And so I gave up.
If you could redesign society maybe in a way that would make this easier and more simple for everyone that needs to change their name, and it's not an uncommon process, how do you think it should work?
So the government, I don't know how all this works, I've never tried it, but the principle is there's a one-stop shop for notifying of death. So the idea is that there's a government service where if somebody's died, you notify this service and then they go and notify everybody else for you. I have no idea I assume it doesn't work very well. But that's the intent. And I think that would be super useful. I mean, it wouldn't change a lot of the work gubbins, but just having that just to go, okay, with my passport and everything's done. It should be free. I shouldn't have to pay to change my passport. It's free to change driving license, which is nice. Something else interesting about names and driving licenses actually is that only women have titles on their driving license.
Wow.
So your driving license doesn't have a gender marker on it. So it's not like a passport, right? So it doesn't have like MRF on it. But women have titles on their driving licenses and men don't. There's a name fact for you.
Is there a historic reason for that?
I don't, because men are always Mr., aren't they?
So it's considered superfluous somehow.
Yeah, so it's like, well, men are always Mr., but women have, they have God knows what, Ms.
It seems like we have solutions for this already. I was thinking the process of changing your debit card with most of these services is easier than changing your name. When you get a new card through it, half the providers I buy off online, certainly the rolling subscriptions, update automatically.
Yeah.
I don't have to change a thing. It just happens. And then you change your name, which is a very, very common occurrence in society. And all of a sudden you're going to have to spend an awful lot more effort to do that than you would change a bank card.
And the other thing as well is that because this kind of first name, surname @gmail.com pattern is so ubiquitous, I had to go through all the trouble of changing my email address everywhere as well. And even now I'm still getting emails from services that I totally forgot I signed up to like years ago, especially when GDPR was a thing, and that everyone's coming out of the woodwork to go, please keep subscribing to our newsletters that you haven't opened in like 5 years. But then I was just constantly getting like dead named by services I totally forgotten about because I'm going to change your email address. And again, for a lot of services, that is a massive pain, especially because we use it as usernames now as well, right? Like it's not like the cool old days where we just had like a username and then the username didn't have your name in it, and so it doesn't matter, like I've not had to change a load of my stuff because I've still got like Citation, as my username everywhere. That's fine. But now we all use our real names for everything, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I've got to change my email addresses, or I've got to change my like domain names, or I've got to change like this, that, and the other. And it's
I try to use like an online handle for most of my life. In fact, even like I normally get called nicknames at work or wherever else I am. Yeah, I don't like this idea that you should have to identify by a real world name like that somehow more you than any other handle you would use.
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's a weird generational thing, because a few people have asked me recently about, when I do talks and stuff and I introduce myself and I'm like, here's my Twitter handle, and people say like, what does that mean? And I was like, well, when I joined the internet, like you didn't use your real name because the internet was full of scary people, and now it's still full of scary people, but like they're scary corporations now rather than old men in chat rooms. So you didn't use your real name at all anywhere.
No.
And so like, I've always had handles. Yeah. And it's just, people younger than me go like, why would you?
Yeah. When I play games, I'm still using the same handle that I came up with at 13. And it's about as embarrassing as you can imagine.
I think I was Dark Chad 666. I'm glad I dropped that because that makes it sound like a.
I'm staying anonymous here. Not outing my gaming handle on podcasts.
But then my Twitter name's kind of become one of my real names. Yeah. And that, it's really easy to trace me through the internet based on it. People occasionally introduce themselves to me. Oh, you're Citation, like it is one of my names now. So now I'm like, oh, okay, so for gaming, I do have a different name. So that if I did decide to trash talk somebody, or if guys on the internet got really upset that there was like a not guy playing their video game and wanted to like dox me or whatever, then I do have a different handle for video game stuff, and then I'll have a separate handle for Twitch as well, which is different from my other gaming handles, just so that I'm less traceable, which sucks. You have to think about doing that, but mean, Twitter's not so bad, actually. I mean, Twitter kind of lets you quite happily change bits and pieces. Tumblr quite happily lets you change URLs and things like that, and that's all right. And actually, Facebook wasn't so bad from a changing name perspective. You just can't do it that often, which is fair enough.
I guess these are all services that have sort of popped up in the last 10, 15, possibly 20 years, and are maybe playing on newer technologies with less restrictions or slightly new thinking about such things. Whereas when you look at things like banks and passport offices and older institutions, they're perhaps less geared up for this kind of thing.
I think so. I mean, there was a big thing with Twitter when it first started that the name field was too short, and kind of lots of friends of mine, if they wanted to use a real name on Twitter, they couldn't, and people want to because they're authors or they're speakers or whatever, and it's important to do that. But then obviously they extended it when they extended the tweet limit, which is just as bad because now everyone just fills up that field with nonsense, which makes it very difficult for people who use screen readers, for example.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So if you fill your username up with emoji, like a lot of people do, you imagine that the screen reader has to read like Chad, banana, winky face, and that gets quite tiring.
This just made sure that I'm not going to do that now. I haven't, but...
No. Yeah, so I think that's it. I also might be a bit tinfoil hatty, but I think a lot of these kind of companies, especially Facebook, can track you now by so much stuff that my name's kind of irrelevant. That for a bank, my name is my main identifier. Like that's how they that's mostly how they identify me, my name, my primary address. But Facebook have got God knows how many cookies on my phone, my computer, Google know everything I'm searching for. They know everywhere I've been, like my name doesn't really matter because to them it's like, I'm person 7,030 or something. So my name's not really relevant. It's because they can still tell that, we can still show you this advert. We don't care who you are.
Yeah,
it's like you're walking past a McDonald's or, you mentioned a McDonald's yesterday and we definitely weren't listening in, but here's a McDonald's advert, That's part of it as well, that identity's kind of become a bit less we've got a bit less control over it. As individuals.
I hadn't thought about that in that way. If you've kind of got an identity that you don't even know. Like behind the scenes, there's a number somewhere at Facebook and Google that is you.
Yeah, I mean, there was the thing with Twitter and Google and Facebook, actually, a lot of places, they will gender you, even if you don't supposed to tell me your gender is. So because Google have anonymous profile, so if you're not signed into Google, they'll still track you and assign you an anonymous profile.
Right.
And Twitter do the same thing, and they've changed it now, but where they basically assign your anonymous profile agenda. So Twitter, I don't remember about a year or so ago, they've released that now, so you can go into your settings and see what gender and age Twitter have assigned you based on the things you talk about. And then you can change them.
Right.
So they basically look at your name, so whatever your display name is, if it's a male name, female name, they look at what you talk about and they look at what your followers talk about. So like it assigned me as male because I talk about video games and software engineering. So
that's scary.
That's the thing. So yes, I mean they look at your interests and stuff. I mean when you look at things like Google Analytics, for example, it will tell you the gender of your audience, and that's not because your audience have necessarily told them what gender they are. It's because they've guessed based on what they were looking for, or things they've already looked at, or things they've said, done, their friends, their networks, that kind of stuff. If you've not checked your Twitter profile out, I can't remember what it is, but it's in there somewhere. You can find out what gender you've been assigned.
What gender you should be.
What gender you've been assigned by the machine. And you can change it.
That's very self-determining though. Like the reason it's picking up gaming and software engineering as male speech marks, big speech marks, is because of a bunch of history that we'd rather hadn't happened, and it's perpetuating that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at there was a thing going around about so I think it's Turkish has gender neutral pronouns. I think it only has gender neutral pronouns, doesn't have gendered pronouns at all. So there's no he or she, it's just whatever the equivalent they is. And they notice when you put it into Google Translate will assign a gender to that phrase. So in Turkish, you'll put, they are a nurse, they are a doctor, and then Google translate it to she is a nurse, he is a doctor, that kind of thing.
Wow, okay.
Because they look at, like patterns and stuff.
So the AI is taking on board our prejudice?
Yeah, all of the time.
In the same way, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is, not great.
Not good.
When I did that open rights talk about adult filters, and then kind of some of the talks around about gender as well, like real name policy comes up a lot. Because it's kind of tangentially related. So trans people will change their name. So a lot of people change their name and their gender marker at the same time, for example. Or not necessarily at the same time, they might change their gender marker and then change their name later or whatever. So it is kind of a group where those two things intersect a lot. People may also change their name because they're escaping a kind of domestic abuse situation. And those are the groups of people that real name policies tend to harm the most. So talking about the World of Warcraft thing, actually, there was a thing when Blizzard decided they were going to put Real ID in. So like, we're fed up of all the trolling on our forums, which is fair enough. You're all going to have to sign in with your real name. Some people kicked off because they're like, oh no, my trolling. But a lot of people kind of kicked off because they're like, well, I don't want to use my real name. And there was a great thread where someone was like, okay, then here's my real name and here's the state I live in, do your worst. And like, they found out where he lived, they found out like his wife's name, they found out where she worked, they found out where his kids went to school, they found out all this stuff just based on his name and his state.
Yep.
Or his name in his city, something like that. It's like, yeah, actually, you know.
You can get a lot.
You can get a lot, yeah.
Doxing is a thing. It happens and people will use it as a weapon.
Yeah, especially if you've got quite an unusual name.
Yep.
You know, there's not that many people with my name. I mean, especially because Chad's a very American name, but, you know, it's not a very British name. So there's not that many British assigned female at birth Chads knocking about. So, you know, I'm fairly easy to find. I kind of think a lot about this because, like, if we didn't have real name policies, then I wouldn't care. Like, so part of the reason changing names fairly easy on Twitter is because they don't really have a real name policy. Whereas places like Facebook do. And then the thing is that Facebook decides what's a real name and what's not. So there's a famous adult blogger called Violet Blue. Violet Blue's her actual legal, for whatever sense of the word, that's her actual name. But she's constantly getting reported by people who don't like her on Facebook for having a real name. And so she keeps getting her account taken off her for having a fake name. You know, there was a lot of stuff with Native Americans having their Facebook accounts taken off them for not having real names.
Wow.
So, you know, so they have their kind of, you know, native names or whatever, but...
So it doesn't sound
like
a real name.
Like a real name. Like,
I'm using air quotes on
Yeah.
podcasts, but yeah.
And presumably sound like a real kind of Western name.
Yeah, I mean, probably. I mean, I don't know. So we had a thing where I used to run a event for women in code, to teach women how to code. You're always slightly on edge that guys are going to sign up for it to be jerks. And we did have a couple of foreign names I didn't recognise. And so you have that thing of going, you know, like, is it something we have to go back to and go, actually, this is only for women? Or, you know, we can upset, you know, and like, that's really hard. So yeah, I mean, there is that. Yeah, it perpetuates a very Western idea. Unicode, you know, we're still struggling with people with apostrophes in their name. Like, I worked with an Irish guy, you know, who's an O apostrophe something, you know, and that breaks everything.
I don't know if you've had this Ben, but I work with someone with a double-barreled surname, and they've had problems just signing up for bank.
So many systems will not take a hyphen or a dash or any. So it's similar to what you were saying earlier, Chad, about how people have got two last names and the first surname becomes like a middle name, although it would be in the correct field, as it were. If you were reading my name on some systems, you would be forgiven for thinking that my middle name was Lavery, whereas Lavery is the first half of my surname. Because, yeah, the systems just haven't been designed to cope with double-barreled names.
Yeah, it's just... I mean, double-barreled names they're not that new, are they? I mean, yeah, I mean, I know bank systems are old, but they're not ancient. I mean, some of it is to do with the fact that when we started making everything digital, well, even before we kind of called everything digital, we just basically got things that were already on paper and moved them into databases. So all of the flaws of a paper system have been moved to technology.
Yeah.
You go, these are all the fields that we want because they're on this bit of paper. This bit of paper will only accept so many characters because, you know, it's a bit of it's a form that's got the boxes in it, so people writing it properly. And then we've never really gone back to looking at it again and going, you know, we've got like infinite hard drive space, right? Why do I need a 30-character name?
Not even just length in terms of like, you know, it must conform to 30 characters. I know of a couple that when they got married, they didn't like each other's surnames and so decided to adopt a completely new one. And I believe that the surname they went with was Q, a single letter Q. And they said the amount of systems that wouldn't allow you to have a single character surname. 2 letters was fine, but 1 letter, that's illegal. You're not allowed to have that.
Yeah, I mean...
So people have even put checks in for minimum length.
Yeah, that's just so... I get why you want something maybe to not be blank, although I can't remember which way around it is, but I'm pretty sure someone told me about someone who either doesn't have a surname or doesn't have a first name at all. I mean, people set up family policies, for example, you know, you have like Spotify's family subscriptions and things, and Google set up a family thing around time of Google Plus, and that had you're a family if you live in the same house and have the same surname. which doesn't make any sense because there's no there's no legal requirement for you to take your husband's name or your wife's name.
Yep.
There's no legal requirement for your kids to have your surname, either surname.
But
You
not
can
even,
Yep.
give each child a completely different surname if you're feeling fancy.
And I think that there are some cultures that do exactly that. Is it Icelandic where you get like your father's name with a different ending if you're male or female as your surname?
My stepson was living with us up until recently, and
Yeah.
he had a different surname than both of the people who were, I suppose, parental units. I think that was what we got called. It didn't cause any problems, but the names are not conforming to the standard rules that you would expect.
Yeah. I mean, there's, I think it's Quebec where their convention is that you don't ever change your surname even when you get married. And there was a couple who the wife wanted to change her surname to her husband's surname when they got married, and they couldn't do it. They had to go through the courts to get that changed. Because even though I've complained about names for a while, we're lucky that we still don't have to have a depot. A lot of countries you have to go to a court and prove your case. And if your court says your case isn't good enough, then it sucks. A lot of countries have a legal list of names which parents choose from. Essentially, when you're born, there's a limit to legal names, and we're quite free with names and things you can have, unless it's. I don't think there's any. I think the only rules that have been, if there was that kid in Ireland, they wanted to call the kid for real, but with the numerical 4.
Okay.
And they said we can't do that, but the reason you can't do that obviously is because no one's database is going to accept it.
I've got a feeling that perhaps the only rule that I've heard of in the UK is that it's not allowed to be obscene. And that's kind of about it.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Or it's not misleading in terms of you've called yourself a title as your name. So
Okay.
So you can't call a kid sir, for example, in order to, or call yourself sir in order, to do fraud and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of countries have rules about your gender has to be apparent from your name.
Wow.
So people have to change names when they transition, or they can't change names because I think it was Quebec again. I was through the Wikipedia thing, like preparing for this earlier, and they had a case of about 10 years ago where a trans woman wanted to change her name, and they said, well, you can't because because before she got her gender marker changed. But legally, people who are still legally male can't have legally female names, and that had to go through appeal, and that all got sorted in the end, but that's going through, court appeals to get your name changed. So, yes, I mean, that's the thing with real name policies, right? Is like if you're from a country where it's hard to change your name, or, you're closeted, you're transgender, but your parents don't know, or your work doesn't know, and you don't want your work to know for a while, or you don't want certain groups of people to know, or you're leaving your abusive husband and you don't want him to chase you, then, the fact that you mandate what a real name is on Facebook is really dangerous. There was an incident with a trans girl who got fired in America when Google, they consolidated a load of accounts, I think. So it was Google accounts having separate things for Hangouts or something. Yeah. And she accidentally texted her boss from her female name, and she wasn't out at work yet, and she got fired because you can still do that in America. So that's the other thing with real name policies as well. It's like, well, actually, it's perfectly legitimate to have multiple names. I mean, celebrities do it. There's the thing with Michael Caine. That's not his real name. Surprise, surprise. But he kept getting stopped at airports because they go, oh, no, you're Michael Caine, but this passport's like this other bloke. And so he's legally changed his name to Michael Caine so he can get through airports.
Wow. Okay.
So now security's tightened. People just look and go, you're definitely Michael Caine. He's definitely Michael Caine, right? He's a pretty recognisable guy. And he kept getting stopped at airport because his passport has his legal name on it.
Right, okay.
Wow. So he's changed his legal name to match.
Because I'm sure this already exists. There's probably a falsehoods programmers believe about names.
There is a really good there is I can't remember the guy's name, which is embarrassing, but there is a really good talk about names because he has the same problem with multiple middle names. Yeah. So he was saying when he got his mortgage and his life insurance, the mortgage has one middle name on it. Life insurance has the other middle name on it. And when he went to cash it all in or consolidate it or move it or whatever, they wouldn't let him do it because it was two different names.
Wow.
Even though it's the same person. Which is wild.
Yeah. You also kind of make me think that it's not just programmers and systems, it's people as well. That the people in organizations don't understand.
Yeah, it's so based on this physical document that you're stuck essentially with, you can't really do a lot about it from a kind of technical perspective. You can't just say, and as much as I complain about banks, they do have lots of strong regulations about checking your identity and making sure the right identity, and that's fine. But work should be better. I mean, I worked for a fairly big modern company and I shouldn't have to change my name with 20 different services. Yeah. Yeah, I just think there's a lot of misconceptions about what a name is, and how they work and, what's the depot and stuff like this, and it's all really, it's not uniquely a tech problem. It is, but it feels more pronounced, mostly because I'm signed up to way more things than I used to be, right? You used to just have a passport and a driving license, right? But now I've got accounts everywhere. You've got an account for every shop you've been to. You've got an account for every game you played.
Technology has amplified people's lack of understanding.
Yeah. There's no one single place where I can go, please tell me everything I've ever signed up for.
Yeah.
With the email change as well, then that's a whole separate thing. And, and for some places I haven't bothered, and that's distressing because occasionally I'll get an email through to my old name and go, oh yeah, I should probably change that. But then you see it and you go, I should change that. And then you're not bothered because you don't get the email again for 5 months or something. And then you go, oh yeah, no, I should change that. It's not a uniquely tech problem. I think the things talk about real name policy, I think is a really weird tech problem because it seems to be the way that tech companies are trying to solve bad behaviour on the internet. By going, well, if people have their real names attached to things, they won't be arses, but...
No, they will.
But they will, yeah. Yeah, I've been on the internet for long enough.
And like you say, you don't need to have a real name, you don't have to use your real name as long as it's a name that looks real, for the most part.
Yeah, because I changed my name on a lot of internet services before I legally changed my name. And that's one of the reasons I changed my name in the first place legally, was because I ended up in situations where I couldn't keep the two names separate anymore, because I very much use Chad as an online name, and there's lots of people who've only ever known me by Chad and never known my birth name. But it did start, when I started public speaking, it did start clashing a lot, because I would public speak in my legal name, and then someone came up to me after a conference and went, oh, we were going to follow you on Twitter, but it's just this weird person called Chad with an anime avatar. And I'm like, oh yeah, cool, I should change that. So part of it was kind of, and those worlds started colliding, and and that was weird. So it was well, now I have to, and if I legally do it, then I've only got one name everywhere.
Thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at tech_point_0. We hope you join us again for the next episode.